Hello, everybody. Keep you guys, keep you guys as much entertained as I can, whilst Miss Anne is out helping Miss Curie go potty. How's everyone doing? Fantastic, I hope. I'm actually going to grab some coffee because I am falling asleep. I am incredibly sleepy. Out of all curiosity, for those of you here, what time is it for everyone here? Like, obviously for Ann, it's 9 a.m. and for us here in the Central Time Zone, it's 11 or 11:40. What time is it for all you guys? Just out of curiosity. And don't give me military time either. Actually, you can if you want. I'm not gonna say no. Oh, no one else here is in the Central Time Zone with me. Got a bunch of East Coasters and some, one Mountain Time there. It looks like. Ah, Seattle. Yeah, Mathfall. I'll never understand why there's some states that just don't observe daylight savings. Some states that don't, some counties even within states that don't. It's crazy. You can have two counties next to each other um, vertically, where one of them can just not have, or even obviously horizontal, they just cannot have the observation of daylight savings. So yeah, I've heard of some counties in Texas actually where there one county does not and one county does. So at any given point, you can cross that county line and change time by an hour, which is just wacky. Go ahead. All right, Ann's back, guys. The real entertainment is here.
Hey people, good morning. Thank you for waiting on me and my incontinent dog. Welcome to Reaper Pro Tips, and we are back today with Mr. Rock Troll doing dramatic lighting and shadows. And yeah, sorry for the delay, but the dog. And now she's all happy. She's sitting here chewing her bone. I think she's still not empty. We may get another dog emergency coming up, so it may be kind of a disrupted stream today. But yeah, hello everybody. Hello all. Hello. Talking time zones. Yeah, my parents just spend the winter in Arizona, and it always throws me off because their time zones are wonky. Because sometimes they're an hour and sometimes they're two.
Wait, your parents like do they do that regularly?
Yeah, they have a house in Arizona and they have a house in Wisconsin.
So they live in California, but
No,
for the
no,
summer.
no. My
Oh,
parents
okay.
don't live in California. My parents lived in Wisconsin, and I grew up in Wisconsin for
Oh,
forever.
okay.
Yeah.
I
So,
thought you said your parents were in California.
nope. No, none of my family except me. No, I was born out here, but then they
That's
decided
what it
it
was,
was
I think.
yeah they decided it was too expensive and moved.
Couldn't imagine anyone
Yeah,
having
Otter
a
Mama.
summer home in Arizona though. That would be like
No, it's a
crazy.
winter. It's a winter home. I mean,
Or
they
winter
do.
home. I
Yeah, they
mean,
do a
sorry.
snow. Yeah, they do snowbird. They spend like from the end of April through or sorry, the end of October. Like they usually stay for Halloween to see the grandkids for Halloween, but then they leave to drive down to Arizona, and then they drive back up around April. So yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, I guess some states are ending daylight savings, right? I don't mind it. I never have minded it. I mean, it throws me off a little bit for a week, but then it's not too bad. I am watching the dog. Settle down, Kiri. You're not going out there. You're not going, you've got to settle and snooze. She is like such a silly today. I don't know, guys. We'll see. The dog ruption. It's dog ruption. Hey, dog father, thank you for the resub. Hey, all right, man. There we go. Okay, the dog is finally settled. Woof. Alrighty, cool. Whew. I'm just gonna go to Cam because it's just gonna be one of those days, guys. Let me see. I had to center myself too. I'm also off kilter. Anne is off kilter. Well, that's always
Upside
true.
of things is, and you got a lot of energy today, right?
Yeah, I do. I'm pretty bouncy.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
And I decided to use a house brush. No, not a house brush, actually. I lie. But I'm just going to use a gigantic brush. I realized I had this brush sitting over, it's one of my canvas brushes. It was sitting over in my little pen cup. And it's actually a pretty nice, I don't know if it's sable or not. I can't decide. It looks like a sable. But it could be just a cleverly colored synthetic. But yeah, it's kind of it's got that, I forget what that shape is called, if it's filbert or what. But yeah, that's what I thought is synthetic. I was pretty sure. If it doesn't say sable, guys, it's not sable. No matter how much it looks like sable. If the barrel does not say sable, it is not. But this is a good, I don't think so, Dragon Eye. Might be synthetic sable, but I don't know. Trying to feel the bristles, and sometimes it's hard these days, but if it does not say sable, it is usually not sable, because any brush that is sable tends to proclaim it to the heavens. So we'll see. Doesn't matter what it is, actually, for this. When you've got a brush that's this big and you're thinking of using it on a miniature, it actually it doesn't matter. All you need is a brush. And if it's this big, you don't care if the tip curls. So it doesn't matter if it's a synth or not. But I thought that when you've got a model like this, where the whole model almost is one color, I mean, you could just hit it with the airbrush before you ever start, or you could just, use a large brush and do some wet blending. So I thought I would do the Ed today and use a huge brush. It's this one. It's the Royal RNL Zen planer. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's not obsess about whether the brush is sable, because honestly, if it was Taklon, I'd still be using it for this. It matters not at all. So the nice thing about this brush is going to let us, see, it is a little firm. I don't know that it's a sable. I don't think it is. If so, it's a very, when you see paint get kind of scraped across the surface, usually it's a sign that the bristle is stiffer. And usually sable or soft things won't, it's a blend. Yeah, there we go, Dragon Eye. Yeah, I was gonna say, when you see this, it's not a full sable, or or it could be a fake sable, because sable bristles are very soft. And so when you're using your sable to base coat, you usually won't see it scrape paint across the surface like this. It's just kind of a thing to keep in mind if you don't know what a brush is. Can also use this to kind of, I'm gonna see if this is too big for my intentions, but we'll see. Anyway, let's block it in, since this is not going to give us, since the bristles are very firm, it is probably going to take 2 coats to get us a nice solid coverage. I'm going to grab my glasses. I mean, hybrid brushes still aren't sable, right, Francis? They're usually a mixture. They're trying to give you a cheaper price by not using as many sable hairs, but they're trying to give you a similar experience by using a good quality Taklon. But it's still, synthetic, at least partially synthetic, so you're probably still going to see curving in the bristle tips after you use it for a while. They're getting a lot better at making synthetic hairs that are shaped and look like real sable. I don't know if they'll ever be able to quite match the performance of a real sable. I'm sure there's a market for it because a lot of people would rather not use real animal hair. I personally, considering that the Kolinsky is a nuisance animal over in Russia, I don't, since it doesn't impact the overall environment as far as I know, except to help it to take the Kolinsky out of nature. I tend to be pretty open-minded on brushes. All right, so we got a bit of that.
So are synthetic brush fibers, is that characteristic of a stiffer, more rough?
Yes, they're plastic. They're plastic, and plastic just can't mimic hair. It mimics it to a point, but then it fails. It's a weasel. It's the actual Kolinsky sable weasel mathophile. This is Ringnaze. I'm using a bunch of Dungeon Dweller paint for Mr. Troll, so I'm actually using Troll Hide right now. I decided that even though he was a rock troll, I wanted to paint him green. So Troll Hide, I'm mixing up. I'm using a whole bunch of the Dungeon Dweller colors, actually. I was working on him yesterday. Let me line up my lineup while my paint dries. This is actually a good time. So all of these, this is Rock Troll. And all of these guys are Dungeon Dwellers, and three of them come from the same pack, and the Vampiric Mist is from the other one. I also used Goblin Skin yesterday for the area around his nose and lips and ears. Morning rings. Yeah, there was a shortage of Kolinsky sables a few years back, mathophile, that actually was because somebody in the American administration that tracks that sort of thing made a fuss about the natural hair. And essentially everybody had to, the whole new set of permits went out, and companies, for a while there, we couldn't really get Kolinsky sables in this area. Miniature painters were horrified. And traditional painters as well, since it is like really, there's just certain things that Kolinsky is amazing for that no other hair can match. Yeah, then they essentially, were saying, hey, it's a nuisance animal. It's not endangered. It's not even close to endangered. We have too many of them. And so eventually, after a new round of permits went out, the Kolinsky sable brush shipping was allowed to resume.
I wonder if you could make a wild boar hairbrush.
There are. They exist, yeah.
Well, then we should be making those, being that down here in Texas, wild boars are kind of the same. Actually, they're worse, I think, than the weasels. But
I think that boar hair is usually used for shaving brushes because it's stiffness. It's very bristly.
Oh, no. That's fair.
For that sort of thing. So, wasn't, what was it? Anthrax. Wasn't that a thing, back in the 1930s, 20s? That was spreading from bristle shaving brushes? I don't remember. This is all weird little snippets of thing in my head. I'm just using this to just block in stuff while this is drying. Since I'm wet blending, but since this brush doesn't like to get a solid base coat because as I said, it's kind of scraping the paint off the layer, I'm going to wet blend after I have a base coat down. So, and this is something that I often do anyway, even if I'm not using a brush that's producing this effect, just because that way when you're wet blending, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about whether you're getting a solid base coat or whether you're getting a little transparent here or there, which is the main thing with Master Series, right? Because it's not a super goopy paint. So if you want your wet blend to look great, then I recommend putting down just one layer of paint and letting it dry before you start wet blending over the top. Sorry, I got some green on my troll ear. Yeah, that's what I thought. Methophile is boar hair is useful for shaving cream. Yeah, because they're bristly. Hey, no Mezzy.
I don't know. Do you think with enough fabric softener, we could turn a hog hair brush into a usable mini brush?
No, I'm afraid that you need. There are certain qualities of to different hairs. Like camel hairbrush are big and moppy. They don't hold a tip, and so camel hair is really good for big, large-scale washes and things like that. Okay, the problem with using a bigger brush is I really need to put more paint on my palette. I do want to get his back and his front base coated. The arms we probably won't get to. Doo-doo-doo. There we go. All right, good morning, Inara. I'm using Dungeon Dwellers paints today. I'm using a synthetic brush, sadly, to base coat because I wanted to use a gigantic brush, but I don't quite have the nerve to use a house painting brush like Ed. I don't have the mad leet skills that Ed does with the house painting brush. So instead, I am using a large synthetic that I had, or blend, I should say. Same difference in my mind. If it's not a pure sable, you're going to get a lot of the characteristics of the synthetic, and it's going to overwhelm the characteristics of the sable. Though it does carry paint very well. It's got a certain amount of spring to it, which is nice. But I mean, mostly I'm using it just because it was a big brush I had to hand. And also want to point out that when you're using a wet palette, if you're trying to get a solid base coat, be aware the wet palette is going to thin your paint down. And over the course of, say, an hour, it will thin it substantially. So if you're going to do this, sort of, thick base coat, quick out the gate with your wet palette and with a big brush, I would recommend laying your paint down and using it immediately. I noticed yesterday when I was dealing with the wet palette that as the stream went on, my paint got thinner and thinner, which when I'm trying to highlight is great, but when I'm trying to put a nice solid coat on is not. So another factoid to remember about ye old wet palette. Yeah, I'm going to try to keep these paints in frame a bit. So you can see the colors I'm using, and I'll get them out of the way once I've got a base coat down and we can start doing these, blocking in these big highlights. And today I just want to show you guys like how to really make muscles like look dramatic. So let's see here. It depends on which paints you're using and which paper you're using. As far as, I mean, if you mean by more creamy, more like smooth and spreadable, then yeah, absolutely, because water is wicking into the paint. Yeah, use what works, exactly. Actually, I could, Francis. If I really wanted to, I could just put a blob of paint on him and smear it around. It's the same difference, right? I'm putting a blob of paint with my brush, and then I'm smearing it around. The only problem with just dropping a drop of paint on him and smearing it around is that you might get too much paint. Getting too little paint is not a problem, but getting too much paint means that it could pool and, kind of sit in areas and maybe blob up detail if there's a lot of it. Usually it does take a lot of Master Series to do that, though. It's not terribly thick. Now, notice when you don't thin your base coat and you're not using a sable brush, how choppy that base coat looks. See all those brush strokes? And you would not get this if you were using a brush that was softer. If you recall yesterday, I did not get this. Well, I was mostly wet blending, but let me grab a Kolinsky and grab some more troll hide and see if I can get a better result. Part of this is just the wet palette thinning of the paint, and part of it is actually the type of bristle. Right now, because of the brush usage, it's drying blotchy in Ara, but usually I didn't have a problem with it yesterday. But I was also wet blending with it. But look at when I'm using it straight out the gate with the Kolinsky, which is a much softer brush. It's much easier to minimize or eliminate brush strokes. Let me get this focused in. Hold on, guys. So all this is bristle, right? Because, I'm using a smaller brush, so you'd think it would make more brush strokes. But in reality, it's making fewer brush strokes. Because it's soft, it's not scraping the paint over the surface like that partial synthetic. So I'm getting a much more solid coat over the area. And I'm not, my brush is really soft, so it's bending a lot. But look at the difference there. Look at the difference between a big brush, and same consistency of paint. Absolute same consistency of paint. But synthetic versus Kolinsky versus real sable. So, yeah, this is why you don't need to use a brush this big. I mean, I did it for kicks, right? But it's also letting me illustrate a point now that I see my results, right? That the stiffness of a synthetic is going to give you more blotchiness over the model, and the softness of a sable. You could just get a normal red sable, Chewy Boots. Like, don't even get a Kolinsky, just get a red sable. There are like 10 grades of sable, 10 or 15. And the cheap red sables out there are pretty crappy, but I mean, they are still softer brushes. They still hold an okay tip, not nearly as good as the Kolinsky, but it'll still work for base coating. I mean, you know, you could get a cheap big red sable and go to town. But of course, the smoothest, if you really want a smooth base coat, airbrush is the way to go. And then you're even using thinned paint, but it builds up differently because it's being aerated onto the surface. So, so of course I'm not covering the area as quickly with this brush, but I'm getting a much more even coat. And technically, I probably could get an even better coat with a little bit of water, a smoother coat. Although it is getting a little thin now on my wet palette. But yeah, so when you compare the two, Trollbot. Sorry, the troll is mooning you. Apologies, everyone. But you can see, just that. I just scraped my brush over the surface like I did with my big brush. Just made some quick brush strokes. And I am still getting a much smoother coat than I did with that synthetic. I'm doing the same consistency of paint and the same sort of brush stroke, and I'm getting a very different result. So never let it be said that brushes do not make a big difference in your results, even for base coating. No, actually, it's only the stiffness of the hair that is the problem. With this specific effect, Lobrowski, what you're dealing with is a stiff bristle that's dragging the hair, dragging over the surface, and that means it's putting down the paint, but it's taking it up in the same stroke. So it's definitely the stiffness of the hair. If you look at this, like I'm putting a fair amount of pressure, and it's splaying a little, but it's not splaying much. Now, given these are two different sizes of brush. But when I put my Kolinsky against there, it bends much more extremely with the same amount of pressure. I mean, and this would be true even if it was a big one like this. This is a stiffness of the hair factor. And actually, you can tell this is a synthetic because look, the tip is curling. Got it? That never happens with the Kolinsky. I mean, never. So if you see that fuzzed out curling tip, synthetic brush. But yeah, so the biggest factor here is the stiffness of the hair. And like I said, I look forward to seeing, like, they're really trying in the synthetic brush world. They're really trying to mimic really good sables now. They've gone so far as to actually create a tapered hair that's tapered exactly the way a regular sable hair is, but created in plastic. And they're experimenting with different flexibilities of plastic and stuff like that. So some of the synthetic, like the Master's Touch stuff, is pretty good out the gate for if you're trying to highlight. Like if you're trying to do fine highlights like you would with the Kolinsky. Some of those are pretty good until they start to bend. You can go up to a certain point. I mean, and this isn't a huge problem up here, right? Because it's a huge brush, once it's dry, I can put a second coat on and it'll be fine. But if I'm spending the time to do this, then, and I'm not using an airbrush, then it'd be nice to get a nice coat that wasn't streaky. And I can get that with a softer brush, as I am getting. I mean, there's still going to be maybe a couple spots where I need to touch it up. I've got a tiny bit up here, but I mean, that's so easy to touch up. Just one little spot. So that's what I'm getting. Yeah, I think I did mention earlier it's the stiffness of the bristle, but yeah, just so you know. Twisted Oma, since I'm globbing it on, that's not the case. It's simply that as you're putting down the paint, it's so stiff that it's pressing the paint against the surface and pulling it off in the same motion. Because it's too stiff. So the soft brush is going to unload paint, and it's not stiff enough to scrape itself over the surface the way that a stiff brush will. And that lack of scraping is what you're getting for a nicer coat with, a more even coat. Now, if this is a bones model, over primer, you may not notice this as much, but over primer, I tend to use a very thin base coat too, and something I can't necessarily do on bones is too thin coats. Although this is going to take 2 coats for sure to get this solid. Though now I might just start wet blending, because I have a coat, so I may as well run with it. But yeah, so this is the difference between a staple brush and other stuff. Yeah, a stiffer brush would be better for dry brushing Machine Gun Red. Well, you can't reshape them, Chewy. The reason that your synthetic brush is getting that curl on the end is that the fibers of the plastic are actually wearing down because you're rubbing them against the primer and the surface of the model. So you can't reshape it because it's not a shape issue. It's the plastic actually fraying at the tip. That's why it looks kind of fuzzy. So you can't reshape that. That's a structure thing. Like, the hair is actually, the quote-unquote hair is actually fraying at the tip. And you can't go in there with a micro glue bottle and glue back together the frayed ends of that tip, so you can't reshape it. Just putting a little bit more on the front here, and then we're going to go and do some wet blending. All right. There we are. Rawr, he says. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people, for dry brushing, like, if I have to do it, I typically only do it on terrain and on scenery, and on basing. Because dry brushing is really intended to use when you need texture, when you're trying to highlight sculpted texture on a model. You don't want to use it on anything smooth. Don't use it on things like capes or, God forbid, a lot of people use it on hair, but it's terrible for hair. It really is good for pebbled surfaces and things where you want to... It's also good for weathering effects, like if you're doing a tank and you want kind of a rough, gritty texture to show that mud or dirt has accumulated on the vehicle. Then it's really good for that. A lot of plastic model builders have used dry brushing for a very long time to create that effect. But keep in mind that it does create that gritty texture, and you don't want that on a cape necessarily, unless you're weathering the ends or something like that. So, or you don't want it on hair either. This actually, I have used this for dry brushing on big train tiles. And it works just fine. I mean, it's a stiffer brush. I tend to do a very light dry brush, but like I said, I don't use it much. I like to paint terrain, but I don't have much time for it these days. So let's see. So let's look at our light source and figure out where our shadow is going to be. If the light source is coming from here, there's going to be a heavy shadow right under here. Under his neck, and it's going to be down here, coming from his head, and it's also going to be over here. So I'm taking black indigo, and I'm going to introduce that really dark shadow. Since it's a bright light overhead light source, I'm probably going to put it on a little bit darker than that. There. I want it to be pretty dramatic. We're going for drama. Drama. And I'm getting a lot of paint on my hands because I painted the back of the troll, and I shouldn't have. For mini painter problems. Good morning. All right. Boy, oof, my knoll hide has definitely gotten itself all thinned. I must have put too much water in my wet palette because it's like very, very thin. You know what I need? I need a well palette too. That's what I need. Because sometimes I get annoyed. See, now I've got my well palette hiding under my wet palette. See? Cunning. And then I want some white in my knoll. And we have to remember that we have light falling on this area. And light falling up here. I'm not going to do the whole shoulder. I'm going to concentrate on the chest. But yeah, you can see how thin the paint got, sadly. That is the downside. This is why I'm not a huge wet palette user, guys. Is that I like to have control over my paint consistency, and it really annoys me when I can't have control over it, and then I have to stop and I have to like fix it. So that's why I like the well palette, because then I can just build a puddle of this and have it at the perfect consistency. And I'm still soldiering on with the wet palette because I want to do wet blending. Although now I'm starting to think maybe I just need to go to well. I at least should mock in my shadows using the wet. Anywhere there's going to be turned away from the light, we're going to have a lot of shadow. I was blocking in at this point. I'm going to block in my shadows and see if they look correct. There's going to be dark shadows. And again, if we weren't wet blending, we would probably be doing this with layering and not with, you know, we'd be putting down our very dark, much more dark than this troll hide for our first shadow to get this dramatic effect that we want. Because it would force us to deal with extremely dark shadows. But here, I'm just painting them in, and I'm going to wet blend a little bit with some troll flesh. Probably need to grab a little extra of that now. Oh, that's really dark. Not really, Mr. Mayhem. I only base coated it. So, and I talked a bit about why synthetic brushes can be problematic for base coating because of all the streakiness I got. That was entirely the cause of the brush. So, right away, gonna get some more troll flesh. I made a big blorf here, so I'm gonna blend it in. As long as it's still wet, I can wet blend it. Let's see, can you guys see? Yeah. So down here, I'm just pretty much identifying the muscle masses and putting in shadows. I don't want to forget where my shadows are. I want to make sure that I have a lot of dramatic shadows. I want them to be really dark because of the way that his face is in shadow. So I know that this side is going to be darker than the other side. So I'm going to put in a lot of shadows. Mostly on the underside of big muscle groups because I still want some light falling. This is, we talked a little bit yesterday about the different techniques that you learn as a mini painter and kind of the order that I recommend learning them in. And once you understand layering and glazing and washes and wet, maybe a bit of wet blending, at least try it out to see if it suits you. Stuff like that, what I call mechanical techniques that are about brushstroke and paint consistency. Once you try those things out, and once you have kind of a good grasp of what they are, then you move on to things that I call conceptual techniques. And one of those conceptual techniques that should probably be the first that you do or attempt would be understanding zenith lighting, or what we call overhead lighting. It's the same thing, but they call it by two different names. They tend to call it zenithal in Europe. A lot of Americans, depending on how recently they've elevated into the mini painting circles, the older ones often call it overhead lighting because that's what it was called when it first came over in here. But it's the same thing. It's essentially, it starts training you for everything else. Because what you're doing with overhead lighting is you're starting to imagine the light source coming from a particular direction, usually above, thus the term zenith. Above is the easiest one, right? Because it's what we see in nature with the sun up above our heads. During the end of the day or the beginning of the day, you get a slanted light. But, during the middle of the day, you get a more or less diffused overhead light source. So the most effective way to become a better painter at that point and to set yourself up for success later on is to start imagining how that's going to work. Start thinking about where your heavy shadows are going to. If the light is coming here, he's going to have a heavy shadow down here. There's no question of it. And so, a surface that bends, like his whole chest is a bit slanted. So a surface that cuts in away from the light is going to have shadow. So after you've got, you understand what layering is, you understand what glazing is, at least, you've practiced it a little bit. You may not be awesome at it, but that's when you can start moving on to conceptual techniques and start practicing your lighting. This is a thing that got really neglected in the Americas, or at least North America, because we come from such a gaming background. I think this is my personal theory. It may not be true, but I think because we come from a miniature gaming perspective, like D&D and all that, and miniature war games, and a lot of our miniature painting community built up from those things. Whereas in Europe, I think there's a lot more encouragement in the arts in general to look at things like a traditional canvas painter might look at them. So in Europe, they're very much about like zenith lighting or realistic light sourcing and things like that. It's just part of it to them. Whereas for us, we grew up more just, with put shadows in your, where you've got dips and, put highlights where places stick out, and maybe we weren't as concerned with dramatic or realistic lighting as much, right? And so we weren't trained really to think like that. So now that miniature painting, we're very much a global community, and these days when something hits in Europe, it hits over here too at about the same time. So now we can think about these things, and so I like to encourage you guys, if you're new, don't think that thinking about light is an advanced technique that you have to wait to look at. You should start thinking about it. Early, because the earlier you start thinking about it, the more it's going to have time to kind of sink into your brain. The more you're going to internalize it, right? Because that's the stages of learning a new thing, right? Is you look at it and then you realize you don't know, very much about it, and so you keep looking at it and you try it, and your hand isn't as good as your eye, but at least you know where you're going, and then eventually you internalize it where it becomes a natural way to think about things. And that's when you can start like doing cool dramatic stuff. So start thinking about it early. Start trying it out early. Start thinking about your highlights that way, instead of just saying, oh, well, this is a muscle, so it's going to be shadowed around the edges and it's going to be bright in the middle. Instead, think more like, oh, well, the light is coming from up here, so the entire underside of this arm is going to be darker. It doesn't mean you can't highlight in your shadows. It just means they're much more subtle. And maybe it forces you to go much darker with your shadows if you're trying to do a dramatic thing. So I don't consider it an advanced technique to do zenith highlighting. I consider it something that everybody should think about, because in a lot of ways it can improve your painting. And especially if you really like the dramatic, I tend to call it European style, but so many Americans do it now too. If you like that dramatic lights and shadows thing, then that's what you've got to start wrapping your head around if you want to paint that way. It helps also if I always recommend this when you're learning, by the way, and it applies to everything. It doesn't matter whether you're doing 28 mil or what you're doing, but you should, if you have a favorite painter and you love their style and you think, I want to paint, in that style someday, I'd hope that I could get to paint something like that because I love the look of it, then find a model from that painter that you can get a hold of and buy the model and get a nice, make sure you can get a nice high-res picture of the model that is done by your favorite painter. And then try to duplicate what they've done. Like, focus in on every little area. Pay attention to where they put their highlights and shadows. Pay attention to, where they're blending and maybe where they're just roughing it. Look at their choices, like their color choices, And doing this will elevate your painting. And it's fun, I think. There's no real pressure. You don't even have to show it to anybody, although it could be a fun thing to do for a blog entry is, hey, I've got, Sergio's, this bust or Kirill's bust that he did for Young Miniatures, and I'm going to try to paint it like Kirill, or like Sergio, or like whoever, whoever some of your favorite painters are. And that can be really good. Even if you fail, you will learn so much. And you should never consider it failing, right? Because your object is to learn. Your object is to try something that makes you think differently about miniature painting. So, things like that. Oh, did I decide not to do the lighter belly? Yeah, I kind of just I was having fun with the stomach muscles. So I decided not to. Mostly because I was showing them how to base coat with a giant synthetic and how it makes a streaky coat. We talked a lot about brushes at the beginning, Althea. Hey there, Rax. No, not yay drama.
What do you mean, not yay drama?
Well, okay, drama on the troll is okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, that's what you meant. All right.
That's what I meant. Like,
okay.
You said you were going for dramatic.
I'm
writing,
like,
and
for
I said yay drama.
for the minute there, I was like, am I dating the right guy? It's the Anna David show. Alrighty. So let's see here. I need more shadow here. But yeah, you're right. The American education system really shorts on the arts, and it's a shame. It is a shame. As an art student in the Americas, I can agree completely with you that it is a shame. I managed despite that, and I still feel like I got kind of a crappy art education, and I was an art major, and taking art classes all through school, so at all levels. So yeah.
You did not like your art teachers, did you?
The school I went to had a very I want to say craptastic. But let's just say, when I am not lying, guys, when I say that even though I went to art school, I learned more about painting and acrylics and painting in general from miniature painting than I ever learned in art school. And I am dead serious about that. When I went to school, they didn't teach you much technique. Like, they didn't focus on technique. I had a bunch of instructors that threw the brush at you, told you to do something interesting, and walked away. And then I had the opposite in my drawing classes, where they wanted to snatch the pencil out of your hands, so you couldn't actually like build muscle memory or learn anything. So art school can be a real crapshoot, and it really depends on where you go and who your instructors are and how much they care. But I learned so much about technique when I started painting miniatures, and technique. That's why I always encourage, why I have been encouraging all of you to focus on foundational techniques like layering and glazing and washes and how you apply the paint, what the paint consistency is, what brush are you using, concentrate on that stuff first, then start doing awesome. That puts you in such a good position then to execute some of these awesome techniques that you see, like maybe transparent cloth or NMM or whatever. It's going to assist you, because then you're not going to be fighting the brush, right? You might be fighting the concept, but you're not going to be fighting the paint. And so I definitely think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, to get this guy to look really dramatic, one of the keys is to put a real light. You want the highlight on the top of the muscle to be right up against the shadow under the other muscle. And we kind of have a little crunchy area here that isn't quite as dramatic. That's right under the chest, because there is going to be a shadow there, just not as heavy. I want to make sure at this time that I grab a lot of black indigo and make sure that I've got a nice dark shadow under every muscle that I want to bring out, that I know where the boundaries of that muscle are. Don't scrimp on the shadows. I've mentioned this before, but when I was a little art major, one of the things I was really weak at was pushing contrast. I used a lot of pencil, but I was always timid about taking my shadows darker. And I carried some of that over to mini painting when I started painting. And it's taken me years to kind of get myself comfortable with pushing shadows almost to black, to create a much more, contrast, much less illustrative style. It gives you less of a cartoony illustrative style and more like an oil painter style, I almost want to say. Very high drama. Yeah, Otter Mama, you are lucky if you get it then, Rings. Some art schools are excellent. But usually then you're definitely committing to going to, I want to say, a high-end art school, like a school of the arts. And my parents didn't want me, my mom wouldn't have had a problem with it, but my dad really wanted me to end up in a more quote-unquote practical profession. So there's no way he would have shelled out money. I could have gotten in, I think, but there's no way he was going to shell out money for me to go to real art school. At least he had some hope that if I went to an art school at a real college, I might switch majors or end up in advertising or something that was vaguely respectable. Instead, look at me. I'm a miniature painter. Yeah, Dad's still mad. Okay, not mad, but he still doesn't improve. My father would much rather have had a less independent-minded daughter, I'm afraid. All right, so let's talk about the shape of highlights here as we got good work on his muscles. Also, I need to kind of watch things because the muscles are actually slanted a little bit away from the light, so I probably need to keep the highlights a lot darker down here. Because it just because it's in shadow doesn't mean you don't need to highlight or shade it. It just means that you have to kind of downplay your highlights a bit and emphasize your heavy shadows. Because you don't want to totally just paint it dark. Although that is a valid way to do it if you want to. But you can still put a little bit of light down there. Just not as much as you're going to find like up here on the shoulder and maybe this part of the chest. So let's do the chest. Yeah, that happens a lot, Sig Wolf. Art teachers who tell you you're never going to be an artist, writing teachers, English teachers who tell you that you're a terrible writer and then you go on to win a Pulitzer Prize or something, you know. It happens a lot. I mean... And it's just, yeah, well, it's bad teaching, for one, but it's also just, like, not being open-minded. Just because somebody has a different style than you, or a different way of doing things, doesn't mean that's not going to appeal to somebody else. Especially with something like art and writing, where everything is so very subjective. I mean, people might have looked at Harry Potter before JK was published and said, oh, well, that's a nice story. But a lot of people would never have thought that she'd be a billionaire now. You know, let's just be honest. I mean, it's like, you know, so it's that sort of thing. It's like other people's perception of your work before your work is actually put out into public and tested in a real audience. It's like, never take it too much to heart. It's why I mentioned the other day I'm about to start submitting my first novel to agents, and I'm ready to get a buttload of rejection notices, but I'm still excited. But you've got to have that attitude. You've got to know that, you know, some people just are going to read your thing and not think it's that great. And that doesn't mean that your thing is bad, or it doesn't mean that it isn't great. It just means that person thought so. So, never... For me, I'm doing the... actually, you guys could try this trick too, but I've bought a bunch of cute dragon stickers, and I'm going to make myself a pretty art board of rejection, so that every time I get a rejection, I can give myself a cute dragon sticker. But things like that can help if you're afraid of failing, you know, and think we all are on some level. Even when it's just failing at, you know, trying to make a miniature that we really like look as good as we wish it would. So try to find some fun in it and forgive yourself and you know, be lenient on yourself. Planer, yeah, we can talk for sure. I mean, I could send you my first, you know, 3 chapters if you wanted to give me an opinion, but I am going to try to go the traditional route, so I am totally going to pursue an agent, and then, you know, if nobody wants it, then we'll start pursuing self-pub. But I always wanted to be traditionally published. I know it's really hard to get that nowadays, but I'm going to try. And then we can look at, then I'll look at smaller presses, or self-publishing comes in so many different, indie publishing I should call it now. It comes in so many different flavors these days. It's no longer as clear-cut as it used to be. But my main thing against indie at this point is I actually did a very careful breakdown of it after talking to an author who started out traditional and then went indie. And the big thing is I'm putting so much energy right now into my Patreon. And if I was going to become a, you know, really give my all as an indie author, I'd have to do, you know, the same amount of work times 2. So we'll try the other way first, I think. And... So now I'm looking at the striations on his chest. Oop. If you're wanting to throw your all into it and then it ends up tabletop ready, rings, and you wish that it would be better, do kind of re-look at your fundamentals. Like, what are your fundamentals? Are you just base coating and washing? Are you working on your layering? Can you target where your weakness is? You know, how is the piece failing really in your mind? You know, 10 to 1, it's if you really do want to push it, but you always end up with tabletop, it's a technique probably thing. But on the other hand, if you're not looking to put a lot of time in, then I mean, tabletop may be where you're at until you decide, oh, I love this model and I'm going to spend as much time on it as it takes to make it beautiful, right? There's a different it's really your goals. Like, what are your really your goals? If it's really, I got to get this done for the game, then it's going to be hard to paint it to a very high level. Although my Mimic turned out okay the other day, and that didn't take that long. So maybe wet blending could be something you got into. Because wet blending does allow you to speed and get good blends and work on other things like highlights. So once again, trying to figure out where light is going to fall. And if light is falling from above, I think it really is going to hit his hip right here. So I'm lightening that area. But then I need to remember that it's going to hit these muscles too. So I need to lighten those areas. And the other thing to remember is that with a rounded area like this, your highlight is necessarily going to be rounded. You want to bring out the shape of the muscle here. So figure out where your light is coming from and make sure you're not just doing a flat highlight. Try to make it more round so that you don't lose the shape of those masses there. If you just put a line highlight over the top, it's just going to look like the muscle is a square. So you can put a lined highlight at the end, but you should try to make it rounded highlights before then. So like if I put a little bit of an extra highlight here. And the way to get this drama is really to go from a very deep shadow to a very bright highlight. And you want the shadow from the muscle above to be right up against the highlight from the muscle below. So that's where you get this big drama, is this deep shadow under this big muscle, and then where it's catching the light coming down here. And I want to probably also get the side of that muscle. So that's starting to come out. I need to get more on the chest here. I need to get the side here. Yeah, if you're at tabletop level, but you're trying to work on display pieces, again, break down your techniques. Where are you on layering? Where are you on glazing? Where are you on like wet blending? Where are you on visualizing light? How about color composition? Where are you on those things? And kind of analyze your choices and maybe look at a couple of examples of the particular model you're working on if you can find them. But really ask where your fundamentals are. Where are you falling down? Are your highlights just not there? Are they really narrow? Or are your highlights everywhere? Are you losing your midtone? Are you just not getting like the blends that you want? In which case it's time to work on wet blending or layering. Again, analyze your fundamentals. Figure out where your technique might be weak and where you might want it stronger. You don't have to do layering. You can do wet blending, airbrushing, all sorts of things, right? But you can't do airbrushing on little areas, but most of the time you don't need perfect blending on little areas either because they're so tiny. There's going to be a dark shadow underneath this muscle. Going to be a bright highlight up on there. I'm getting there. I feel like I'm still a little off here. I need a little bit something here, but I don't want to go up too high. But it needs to be a little brighter, right there. Just a tad. There's such a dark shadow here, and I probably need to pick up this little line of muscle because it's toward the middle. There are times I will reach for the stylistic choice, even though it may not be strictly correct to put a highlight here. I may reach for one anyway because it'll define the mass. And then I'll kind of assess it. And if it doesn't look right, then maybe I tone it down. But yeah, when I started getting better at my stuff. Oh, I see. You just kept painting and painting, going for a tabletop piece. What I recommend if you have that problem, Rings, is find a model that you absolutely love that maybe pushes your comfort zone a little bit or gives you room to work on whatever you think is weak. What do you think is weak? I mean, you were painting and painting. Why? Were your blends not good? Were you thinking your highlights weren't good? Analyze that. Pick a piece that plays to that, and then still be painting all your gaming models because that's going to help you increase brush control. But then try to put, like a half an hour here and a half an hour there into your big display piece and try to really concentrate on why you are repainting. Like, what are you trying to do that isn't working? Okay, so what fundamental does that affect? Is it blending? Is it layering? Are you trying to layer and you're just getting, not smooth blends? Then it's paint consistency. So then you can drop back and kind of study, do you have to thin more, All of these questions you can ask yourself. Get analytic about your painting. It's art, but when you're dealing with technique, it pays to get analytic and to troubleshoot yourself. Because you want to get around, and sometimes you need to ask somebody. Sometimes you just need to show it to someone and say, okay, where is this weak? I mean, put it up on, if you're on my Discord, put it up on my Discord. We have a feedback wanted channel, or you can put it up on the Reaper Discord if you wanted to, if you're not part of my Patreon, and just ask, guys, I'm trying to get better. What do I need to do? What's my weakness here? I keep painting this and it's not getting any better. What am I missing? Because sometimes, just like with writing, you can be so close to the piece that you don't get it. Like, you can stare at it and you just can't figure out what's wrong. So take advantage of the fact that we have a very friendly and inclusive community, and get some feedback. Yeah, I mean, when that's a thing, I mean, there comes I think it every once in a while I do a piece where I'm satisfied with a lot of it, but there's always something that I would change. But I don't let myself like get dissatisfied over it. Like, that's a mindset thing, I think, too, is just be satisfied with it. You painted it to a high level. Sure, it's not perfect. Nothing you paint will ever be perfect. Try to do models where you look at a particular part of it or area and you're really happy with that area. Like, you're like, oh, I nailed the face on that one. I nailed the eyes. Oh my gosh, I love the tattoo on this. Oh, I love the metal on this. I did a great job on the metal. Try to think of it that way. Switch your mindset. Because we are too hard on ourselves. And sometimes that hurts us. Often, I think it does. You should reach for a high level if that's what you want to do. But try to shut off the inner critic if it's not helping you. Otherwise, you just get in... what is it they say? That perfect is the enemy of good? Or that good enough is the... I forget. It's like a counterintuitive saying, but it pretty much says you're never going to be happy with anything if you're trying to be perfect. Because it doesn't exist. Just trying to get these muscle bands up here defined a little bit. Yeah, certainly is the enemy of sanity. Hey, friends don't let friends paint drunk unless they're painting plaid rings. Then all bets are off.
Is George the source of that? Is George the source?
It was one of the imps. Sue. I remember Sue and I saying it, but I don't remember who it came from originally. Yeah, Mivwin, we always will. I mean, I see the flaws in my work too, but I still let myself be happy about the things I get right with the model. Like, on my Mr. Grumpy bust that I did, finished up for Kubla Khan last year, like, the metal is amazing. I feel like I nailed the metal. Like, even Kirill said the metal was excellent in class. But I feel like I fell down because I rushed the cloth. Like, I feel like the cloth isn't as good as it could have been. I could have done a lot more. But that doesn't impinge on my enjoyment of the bust or keep me from keeping it, right? Because there's still parts of that bust that I feel that I did amazingly well on. And so I let myself be happy with that and still count it among my best pieces, even though there are weaknesses and flaws in it for sure. So you can be realistic with that while still being gentle with yourself, is I guess what it comes down to. Yeah, we did the face yesterday. I managed to get it like it's kind of, this side is more shadowed and this side is more bright. So we're working on just dramatic highlighting and placement of highlights and shadows today. It's fun. This is something Sergio covered in his class, and I would highly recommend taking a class with Sergio. He really talks very well about different shapes and the volume that you're trying to convey and highlighting. and get some excellent results. He does believe in the airbrush as well, so if you have an interest in airbrushing, but you haven't been able to, really delve into it, if once things have calmed down a bit, if Sergio comes back to do classes in this area, I would highly recommend his class. I'm a little bit goopy here with my paint, I'm afraid. Paint consistency is just not very regulated. Should have mixed up more stuff on my well palette. It's not too late, Anne. You can still mix up paint on your well palette. Yeah, and that's fair, Machine Gun Red. I mean, it's totally fair to do that. If you get it to a point where you more or less like it, and you're pretty sure that if you keep messing with it, you're gonna mess it up, that is a valid place to stop. There's only so much you can learn from any one model, I feel. And so, for me, then it's time to kind of take what you've learned, because you've still done better than you thought. Now move on to another model and try to apply that again. All right, so here this is probably a bit too broad, this striation on the lower part of the pectoral here, because it's starting to really slant under there. So I think I want to actually darken that down. I'm going to thin down some troll flesh and do a glaze. And once again, I prefer the well palette for this sort of thing. If I need an amount of it, if I'm not just doing a brush full, I like to just premix it and reach for it when I need it. And just trying to shade the, adding some more shading to the left side of the pectoral muscle here to fade it out a bit. Make it look more in shadow. You can see the wet part. And I also need to probably do the same with this little muscle down here. The light definitely isn't going to hit all the way over on this. So I should block that out a bit. And I'm going to do so with a mixture of black indigo and troll hide. And it still is a little bit lighter than the area around. But I need to shift my highlight on this to be over here. Over on this side, because this is where the light's coming from. Likewise down here I need to shift it a little bit. So I'm darkening this area up. There's still a little tiny highlight on this area, but it needs to be not quite as light as it was before. And likewise over here on the side. Let's get some of my glaze. Take this down just a little bit over here. Can keep a small amount of highlight down here, but I don't want a lot. Just need at the end we'll need just little bits of touches maybe over here somewhere. I still think that's probably way too light. There. Let's see here. We got another muscle. We got a muscle up here. We've got there. It's a little bit of stuff over here. Want a little bit of lighting, but not too much. So we're looking like this right now. And I'm trying to see if I've got, I need to shadow a bunch of this underneath the arm. So I'm just pretty much just put a huge slobber of black indigo down the side, which, you know, may cause some people to go eek, but making myself go outside of my comfort zone is results in better results if I'm aiming for very dark shadows. All right. We're getting there. We're getting there. But that makes that actually look better. I still feel like I've got... Actually, this is starting to read pretty well. Pretty well. I think I need a little more dark shadow here. This needs a little bit more frame here. The muscles here are a little lightly sculpted, so it's a little hard to see where I'm going. Okay, I've got a little muscle there. And maybe some of this needs to be darker. Right now I'm just troubleshooting. Now I'm like, all right, some of this stuff needs to be darker, so I need to knock it down and then see if it reads better. we go. That's a little better. I think I want more highlight on that hip. Both. HM Road Dog. I had the wet palette out at the beginning, but then I started mixing up some stuff down here in the well palette because I wanted thinner application and I wanted more consistent paint consistency. I was getting frustrated that the wet palette was thinning my paint too much, in short, which is one of the main reasons I'm annoyed with wet palettes. But yeah, didn't I say? I believe I said that this is the week of the wet palette in Anne Land. I don't know if I'll keep it around or not. Maybe I'll keep it around and make myself use it for a while. I'm always telling you guys to push yourselves, so you know I may as well do the same with me. This is why I brought it out in the first place. And now we're just blocking in more dark. I want I think I've still got too much highlight over here. Gonna knock that down. Knock that down. That's a little bit better. You can still see a little highlight, right? Just a little bit of highlight, but not much. Gonna knock that down. Knock that down with a little bit of glaze so that looks more realistic. I mean, for setting stuff up in wet blending, which is what I was doing for a lot of this HM Road Dog, a lot of this stuff, when it started out as a wet blend and just blocking in, it's great for that. I mean, it's fast. And it really is a nice tool for that, for keeping your thick paint wet for a long period of time if you're working with it for an hour or two, for sure. And just keep in mind that if you're trying to get a solid base coat on, you want to do that right out the gate before the wet palette starts leaching water into your paint. And again, also your mileage may vary depending on what wet palette paper you use. All of the parchment or any of the manufactured papers do a different amount of wicking of fluid. They have a different porosity, whatever. And so you want to keep that in mind when you're aiming for, you know, it may suit your style. One paper may suit your style, another paper may not. So you may want to mess around, ask questions, try some different papers. All right, just putting a little bit more highlight on that hip. Now I want to get a little bit more over here. Boop, boop, boop. Trying to keep in mind where my highlights will be, where my light is coming. Where is it going to hit? I think almost all this area needs to be a little lighter, because the light will probably hit here. This is a constant analysis of kind of saying, all right, if it doesn't look quite right, what am I missing? Where would the light be hitting that I don't have a highlight? Or where is the light not hitting that I have a shadow? But now this area is actually, since I lightened it, this whole area is starting to look correct. But yeah, I'd recommend, if you just came in late, go back and find this sucker on VOD and watch it. We talk a lot about brushes and their effects, and we talk about, you know, the order of techniques. So if you want to troubleshoot your style, if you feel you're not making progress, maybe the order of techniques you should try to learn. How learning overhead lighting is one of those key techniques you want to start working on early if that's the style you like, that sort of thing. So this, I would say that this, all this week, I think the streams have been worth giving them a watch if you haven't caught the whole thing. There's been a lot of good info dump on these suckers. And now that we are getting closer to the end, oh yeah, the Cheap Joe's palette. Yes, if you want to buy, right now the well palette I use with the 28 wells, the ceramic, is on sale at Cheap Joe's for only $5. Which is so inexpensive for something that, if you don't drop it on a hard floor, is going to last you for decades. Much better than going out and spending $1.99 at the, you know, for the plastic one that you have to throw out in a month every, 30 days.
When you start finding this a raid, Miss Ann?
Yeah, well, we started a little late, so I think we have another 10 minutes of futzing probably. But I mean, you can start glancing around, seeing potential candidates if you want.
No problem.
Seeing who's
Just
out
figured
there.
I would get out ahead of it. I was responding to a few emails. So
Oh, yeah, yeah, no problem. Um, but yeah, so right now, let's see what I've got. That's reading okay, but it bothers me a little that this one isn't reading as much. So I think I want to highlight that a little. Can always hold the miniature at arm's length, or the other great technique, even though everybody hates to do this because it shows you all the flaws, but you should do it because it shows you all the flaws, is to take a photograph, a good photo of your model. I really need to finish my Patreon right up for that. Oh, I guess I should plug my Patreon too, because I haven't been doing that much in the last week or so. But I have a Patreon, and it's awesome, and I'm about to put up a video on weathering cloth. I should finish the editing on that today. It is patreon.com/paintingbig. I do a lot of little models too, but I've been trying to do stuff all across the board. If you like Master Series paint, the $5 level is a lot of color theory and paint. And then I have how-to videos at the $2 and $5 level videos and or PDFs. The PDFs are nice because that often gives me a chance to go a little more in detail about the whys and hows without distractions. On a video, I'm trying to shoot pretty fast because a lot of people want shorter videos, so I don't always have time to talk about everything in a logical manner. But in a PDF, I have a lot more time. Alrighty. Let's make this a little lighter. That's looking good. Now look at that. All right, and that was just a simple shift. And if I drop this highlight just a little bit more down, I think it'll be perfect. So I painted some troll hide over that a little bit and that. All right, so now I think we are definitely capturing it. Like that looks to me, when I look at it on camera, that looks like a realistic light source going that way. Like, that's just about right. And then there's very little on this side right now. I would need to clean up a lot over here to make it a little bit more, little more defined. But I think that's really, really transmitting correctly now. Excellent, Honor Mama. Remember to use big paint puddles. So 6 drops of paint minimum, and then the added water or whatever you're doing. If you want a base coat and use your wet palette for base coating, by all means, like, that's what I've been doing. It's super fast, right? But then when it comes to trying layering or glazing or washes, use your well palette. Make sure you make big puddles. And when you're trying to layer, especially, you'll find your paint consistency stays perfect for a very long time. So I hope you like it. I hope you like the control it gives you. I think it can really help you get a feel. It's useful in getting a feel for paint consistency, right? When you want to be that person who kind of just looks at the paint and knows whether, roughly that's the right layering consistency, the well palette helps you to do that. You'll learn how it looks when it falls off the side of the palette. You'll learn how it looks and then how it looks when you apply it. And over time, you'll just get a basic understanding of, oh yeah, that's glaze right there. That's a glaze. And oh yeah, that looks like a good layering consistency. We'll run with that and then we'll tune it, right? So I think that's why I think the well palette is a good tool. I think you should always try both. Yeah, I'm very happy with this this torso now. He's cool. He's way cool. I need to add a little bit more. Let's see here. A little tiny bit more highlight, but just subtle. These little muscles over here wouldn't have much. They might be catching some reflected light. Just one thing we could do is make a light source on the other side that's bouncing up at the underside. A lot of people do that if they want a neat, kind of cool, dramatic effect. That would take a whole nother episode. And I kind of do want to get... Oh, I might have gone too light there. If it sticks out too much, then I may have gone too light. Because we are in shadow over here. We want highlights and shadows. We just want them darker than they were on the other side. We do not want them to stick out. You want to pay attention to the area so that people know you did. Like you didn't just, just let it slide, right? You weren't lazy. But you don't want to necessarily, you don't want to have as bright of a highlight over here. The darker you keep it, the more dramatic it'll be. There, now I brought out those muscle masses just a little. You see them? Yeah. So now you can see that I actually cared. I put some effort into it, but it's obvious where the light source is coming from. So yeah, stuff like that. Fluid acrylics are what you are painting miniatures with. A fluid acrylic simply is not a tube paint. It is a thinner bodied acrylic paint. That's what a fluid acrylic is. So essentially that's the art community seeing that miniatures paints had a good thing going, and hobby paints, and then they decided to mimic it. And the arts community does that all the time. The arts companies, if they see a good idea in another hobby that's related, they'll run with it. Oh, thanks, Rex. You're welcome. You are welcome. I'm pretty happy with Mr. Troll. I think he's probably the most dramatic thing I've painted in a long time. So he's looking. I'm very happy with this. It's really rewarding and fun to take a really muscly model like this and try to do this dramatic style on it, because you can just really pick it out. Really, really high highlights, dark shadows. The higher I go with the highlights, the more cut this guy is going to look. So, do what you like, but. Yeah, jumping on the bandwagon. Art companies are great for that. I mean, that's how acrylic inks started, is the textile industry figured out how to make pigments stick to stuff like inks, and so the art companies grabbed that and ran with it. Because traditional inks, which were dyes, had a lot of disadvantages. So, not just for textiles, but for arts. And so when the textile community found out how to do that, the art companies jumped on it. And that's how you get De La Rowney inks, acrylic inks, which are not really inks in the old sense of the word, but are in the new sense of the word. So yeah, they steal from each other all the time, various artistic and craft industries. They're always looking for ways to apply things and make a buck. Just like everybody else. Yeah, I like this. All right. Do you guys have fun? Any questiones? Art industry steals from the hobbyist, then ignores the hobbyist. But they don't, though, Rings. I mean, I think the fine arts industry knows full well that there are a lot more hobbyists, quote unquote. And let's not use that word as a detrimental term. I don't agree with it. But there are a lot more of us who just do stuff as a hobby than there are who do it for a living, or who are dead serious about their art with a capital A. I think they try to appeal across. That's why you have like companies like Golden and Liquitex doing fluid acrylics, right? Is they're trying to essentially give you a better quality product, hypothetically, than you're getting elsewhere, and maybe make some new brand loyalty customers, right? They're trying to appeal. And I don't think they mind it at all when the hobbies pick up an art product and run with it. Yeah, it's all just practice and mucking about, Twisted Omer. Just got to keep yourself, be nice to yourself. Don't call yourself a dummy or a bad painter or anything like that. Keep positive. Even if something isn't working out. You saw this wasn't working out for quite a while on the stream, but in the end, I got it, and now I'm really happy with it. So it's important not to get too frustrated. Maybe you need to take a tea break. Go make a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. Take your eyes away from it for 10, 15 minutes. Do something else. Wash dishes. Something. And then come back to it. A lot of times, if I really can't spot what's wrong, that's what I need. Is I need to put it down overnight. Like this will happen to me at the end of the night all the time. If I'm painting late and I'm just like, arg, something's wrong with this and I just can't see it, I'll just sleep on it. I walk in the morning and either it's much better than I remember, or I see, oh yeah, I just need to do this probably, and I try a few new things, right? So yeah, first rule is to be forgiving with yourself, and second rule is not to be frustrated. Know when to take a break. Know when to step away from the mini.
And I think one of these days we should do a nice big goal stream, maybe, if the community wants to, where we can see if in one block we can focus on one aspect, and you can literally walk me through as a complete noob at painting and producing a result that's good.
Oh, okay. So like one day we tackle washes.
Sure, and then we see if I can replicate based entirely upon your instruction on screen for everyone to see whether or not I can replicate it.
What do you guys think? Did that sound like fun? Be a noob with Justin? Is that what you're going to call it?
I think I know how to get this done. As far as technologically, I think we can do it. It's not too hard.
Ah.
And I think it could be fun.
Yeah,
It
it
just
could be.
depends on what our audience wants to see. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes through an ugly phase too, Lebrowski. Always remember your mini is going to go through an ugly phase where you're just like, and then if you keep at it, it'll get better. Yeah, get that self-esteem. Yeah, self-esteem. Yes, rings, exactly. Cool, thanks, Suro. Yeah, I'm big on that. I also was a perfectionist for a very long time, and it took me a long time fighting with myself to say, no, you don't have to be perfect. You can be happy when you do something really good, and if the rest of it isn't as good, you don't have to like freak out and be unhappy with it, right? So yeah. Current poll. Anna and Justin stream together. Do you guys want to see me try to teach Justin how to actually paint?
Remember, feel completely free to say no. Like, there's no pressure here, guys.
Yeah, no pressure. Like,
It sounds utterly boring and awful, and you don't want to watch me paint. I don't blame you.
yes.
I really don't.
We have to make sure Justin gets a good setup so I can see his work really well, though. And he might. What I often do, Justin, is have my my mentoree send me photos too during the process, because often on a photo I can see the model a little better than on camera. I can zoom in, so we might need to do that at the same time if we do this.
All right.
If we do this, yeah. So yeah, everybody wants you on camera, Justin. No, MCC War, I did not work on the shoulder at all. I only worked on the chest today. This is all base coat. No, I didn't have time to do both. I didn't have time to do everything. So I decided to focus on getting a high contrast torso done and the shoulder. Yes, that does make it look a little weirder for sure. I did block in the shadow on the shoulder just so I was getting the heavy shadow, but I didn't actually bring up the shoulder. So, and I'm not sure, I mean, I want to do the gems, but I'm not sure how much I'll be able to. This isn't actually a great example model for getting simple gemstones down, but I'll see. At some point, we will use this model for gemstones. I still have a lot of cleanup to do, obviously. But I need to look at it and see if there's a good one here where I think I can teach you guys, because these all being clustered together is not the ideal. I might be able to use these guys maybe. But when you're trying to teach somebody how to think about, and again, doing gems and crystals counts as one of those conceptual techniques where, you know, you can start thinking about it, but it can be very, very difficult to understand unless you've got some other basics in mind, right? So it's all about light refraction. I'm not sure, Barantor. I honestly, since this is a demo model, whenever I do a model for you guys, you know, it's a demo model. I'm not thinking about finishing it. I'm just thinking about what I can demo with it. So, not certain. I suppose I could cheap out and do them all as rocks except for a few. That seems like it would be kind of weird, though. I don't know. That, I have no idea what color I would do them if I had made them all rocks.
What color would you do them if you made them all gemstones?
Purple. I've got a secondary triad going on. I may as well run with it. Might do some orange and pink ones, too. But it'll be difficult. I'll have to mute them a bit because everything is muted. Though the green is pretty vivid. We'll see. Anyway, that's where we are right now. And who do we have to raid, Justin?
We're going to be raiding zombies.
It's a zombie day. We all, those of us who are zombies can appreciate that. Let me see here. Alrighty. And well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed it. And tomorrow we might do some gemstones. I'm not certain. I don't want to give up on this guy yet. There's definitely more things we could teach on him. I like models that have a lot of different surfaces. And even though he's very simple at core, he does have a few other things here that we could play with. Like the bag and, you know, loincloth and the fur. But the fur is But I need to tackle these. I just don't know if I'm going to be ready to tackle these to teach it by tomorrow. It's not a subject I've ever taught before.
All right, well.
So we'll see you again tomorrow, guys, for Friday show. It's almost the weekend. Be happy, everybody. Right?
Yes, don't forget Reaper Ant is tomorrow.
Whoa. Awesome. Super fantastic. All right, you guys have a fun day too. Be sure to say hi to Zambies and give her the Reaper love. Keep on being awesome. And me and Mr. Troll will try to figure out what we're going to teach tomorrow. And who knows, maybe we'll try to block in some gems and fail utterly and demonstrate how we can keep a positive attitude while sucking. Always useful, right? Always useful. I may as well mess up on camera. Okay, why mess up in person? Why mess up alone? May as well mess up in front of an audience. All right, guys, have a great day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.
See you guys later today.